Hi, everyone. Welcome to Community Eligibility Kickoff, school year 2023 to 2024, hosted by the Food Research and Action Center, or FRAC. I'm Steve Hayward, FRAC's Senior Communications Coordinator. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few brief housekeeping items. We expect this webinar to run about 60 minutes. We are recording the presentation and will send the recording and slides in a follow-up email. Closed captioning is available. To turn captions on, click the CC button in the bottom taskbar and select the spoken language. At the end of the presentation, there will be time for questions and answers. To ask a question, please use the Q&A tab. With that, I'll pass it off to Allison Perez, Senior Child Nutrition Policy Analyst at FRAC.
Thank you, Steve. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Community Eligibility Kickoff webinar for the 2023-2024 school year. My name is Allison Perez, and I'm a Senior Child Nutrition Policy Analyst with the Food Research and Action Center. We want to thank you for joining us for today's conversation. We know how busy everyone is, and we really appreciate your interest and participation. Community eligibility adoption season is upon us, and as schools across the country continue to transition back to normal child nutrition operations, we have seen how vital community eligibility has been this school year in helping with this transition. Looking ahead to next year, we think it's more important than ever that schools and districts in high poverty areas consider community eligibility as an option to continue serving free breakfasts and lunches to all of their students. The goal of this webinar is to discuss the basics of community eligibility, to hear from speakers about their experiences running community eligibility in their districts, to go over FRAC's community eligibility resources, and to answer any questions that you may have about community eligibility. Next slide. We have a full agenda today with great speakers, so now I would like to go over the schedule for the webinar. Once I'm done going over the agenda, I will pass it off to our wonderful speakers to hear more from them. First, we have Latasha Beasley, a program analyst in the Child Nutrition Programs Division of USDA's Federal Nutrition Service, who will give a brief overview of community eligibility. Next, we have Magdalena Prieto, who is the General Manager of School Food Service at the School District of Palm Beach County in Florida. Last but certainly not least, we have Heidi Sipe, who is the Superintendent of Umatilla School District in Oregon. Following our speakers, I will discuss many of the great resources that FRAC has put together to help schools and districts optimize community eligibility for increased participation in federal reimbursements. We will save questions for the end, so feel free to use the Q&A function to the left side of your screen to ask questions. We are also delighted to be joined by Michelle Freim from USDA's Food and Nutrition Service for the Q&A portion of the webinar. Next slide. The community eligibility provision is a special provision of the National School Lunch and School Breakfast Program that allows high poverty schools to offer free meals to all students at no charge. Since its introduction nationwide in the 2014-2015 school year, we have seen community eligibility have steady growth each year as more schools learn about the positive impact community eligibility can have. After seeing a slight decrease last year, in the 2021-2022 school year, I'm happy to report that we have seen record growth in community eligibility for the 2022-2023 school year, with over 19 million students being served in over 6,000 school districts across the country and over 38,000 schools, which is the highest that we've ever seen community eligibility participation. Next slide. And with that, I am pleased to present our first speaker, Latasha Beasley from USDA. Take it away.
Thank you, Allison. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Latasha Beasley with USDA's Food and Nutrition Service. I am a program analyst with the Policy Design Branch in the School Meals Policy Division. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today, and special thanks to the other panelists on this webinar for your work implementing CEP. Next slide, please. I'll begin today's presentation by giving an overview of CEP, including benefits and eligibility requirements. Then I'll discuss key dates for state agencies and school districts interested in or currently operating CEP. Lastly, I'll highlight FNS's CEP resources available on our website. Just a heads up, I do have a few slides that include a QR code. So if you have it available, you may want to have your phone or a tablet so that you can scan the codes. Next slide, please. CEP is one of 4 special provision options in the school meal program. Special provisions were created to decrease the administrative and household burden of completing and processing school meal applications. The special provisions allow districts and schools to operate the National School Lunch Program, or NSLP, and School Breakfast Program, or SBP, at a community level. Rather than making meals available to students based on individual eligibility determinations, districts and schools that qualify for CEP can opt to serve all student meals at no cost. CEP is modeled on, but distinct from provisions 2 and 3, which are other special counting and claiming provisions where all students receive no cost meals. Next slide, please. There are many benefits to CEP. In CEP schools, all students have access to free, healthy meals at school. When all students are served free with school lunch and breakfast, there's no stigma attached to getting a free meal, so participation tends to increase. In fact, FNS's 2022 CEP characteristics study found that the NSLP participation rate is 6.8% higher, and the SBP participation rate is 12% higher in participating local education agencies, or LEAs, relative to similar eligible LEAs that did not adopt CEP. Notably, these increases for both NSLP and SBP were sustained after the first year. There are also benefits for parents. Parents don't have to complete household applications or worry about keeping enough money in school meal accounts. They simply send their children off to school knowing they'll have an opportunity to eat breakfast and lunch. And for schools, we've already mentioned the administrative burden relief that's accompanied by not having to process applications. But also, meal service operations can be streamlined. Just as parents benefited from not having to pay for meals, schools benefit since CEP eliminates any unpaid meal charges, which we know is stressful and challenging for schools to manage. We found another perceived impact of CEP is that participating LEAs were 30% more likely to report the ability to balance food service funds. Even for state agencies, CEP creates a streamlined review process during the administrative review because there are no applications to review. Lastly, another very interesting finding was that a greater percentage of food service directors at LEAs that participate in CEP perceived that average daily attendance increased over the study period compared to non-participating LEAs. Among these LEAs, 58% said that CEP was a factor for the increase. Next slide, please. Now that we understand all of the wonderful benefits of CEP, let's talk about how it works. CEP allows high-need school districts, groups of schools, and individual schools participating in the National School Lunch and School Breakfast programs to offer meals at no cost to all enrolled students for up to 4 years at a time. Eligibility for the provision at any level is based on the percentage of identified students who are enrolled. Identified students are children who are directly certified or categorically eligible for free meals because they participate in another federal assistance program. So CEP represents government efficiency by taking advantage of direct certification data. By taking advantage of income data collected by other assistance programs that students' families are participating in, like SNAP and TANF, which have already checked household income, it removes the burden for schools to check income again. The identified student percentage, or ISP, must be at least 40% in order for a school, group of schools, or school district to participate in CEP. This percentage is calculated by dividing the number of identified students by the number of enrolled students and then multiplying by 100. The ISP is also used to calculate meal reimbursement rates at CEP schools. I'll talk a little more about this later in the presentation. Next slide, please. As I mentioned on the previous slide, Eligibility for CEP is based on the percentage of identified students, which are those students who are directly certified for free meals or who are categorically eligible for free meals without an application. This slide lists the groups of identified students. The first is the students who are directly certified. Students who participate in or have a family member that participates in SNAP, TANF, or FDPR can be directly certified for free meals, for free school meals without an application. In states approved to participate in either direct certification with Medicaid free or free and reduced price demonstration projects, those children identify as free status may be included in the calculation of the CEP ISP. However, it's important to remember that direct certifications for reduced price meals will not impact the ISP, since the ISP is only the percentage of students certified for free meals without an application. The other group are those who are considered other source categorically eligible. These are students who are enrolled in Head Start and students who are documented as homeless, runaway, migrant, or foster children, since these children are also automatically eligible for free school meals. It's important to note through the 2004 Child Nutrition and WIC Reauthorization Act, LEAs are required to establish systems to directly certify children from households that receive SNAP benefits. Other systems are optional, but encouraged. Next slide, please. Since school year 2012-13, USDA has authorized demonstration projects allowing states to test direct certification with Medicaid. With the addition of states selected to participate this year, 38 states will be conducting direct certification matching activities, either free only or free and reduced price in school year 23-24. Medicaid direct certification can help make CEP more financially viable for schools because, as I mentioned on the previous slide, those children identified as free status may be included in the calculation of the ISP. An evaluation by USDA in school year 2019-20 found more than 1.2 million students were directly certified for free meals based on Medicaid data in the 13 states for which this outcome was measured. If you want to find out more information on the demonstration project, please scan the QR code that is listed on this slide. Next slide, please. As many of you may know, the ability to elect CEP at different levels offers a lot of flexibility. LEAs that are new to CEP may want to elect in one school just to see how it works. Grouping can bring in schools with lower ISPs. It also can help avoid parent confusion. For example, grouping schools that feed into each other may make sense, so parents aren't confused by having to pay for a child at one school and then having another child getting free meals at a different school. And electing district-wide, if feasible, offers the most operational efficiency. Next slide, please. Here's an example of 3 schools grouped within a school district. School 2 does not meet the 40% identified student percentage threshold and wouldn't be eligible to participate in CEP on its own. As you can see, their ISP is just below at 38%. However, when school 2 is grouped with schools 1 and 3, the entire group has an ISP of 59%. So all the schools can participate in CEP. Next slide, please. Eligibility is based on the ISP, and meals are also claimed using the same percentage. Reimbursements are calculated using the ISP times a factor of 1.6. This result gives the meals reimbursed at the federal free rate. The 1.6 multiplier approximates free and reduced percentage as if applications were still collected. If the total is less than 100%, then the remaining meals are reimbursed at the paid rate. So an ISP of at least 62.5 means that all meals are reimbursed at the free rate. Next slide, please. We want school CEP election to be successful, so making a sound financial decision is important. If the federal assistance provided is less than the cost of providing all students free meals, then the difference must be paid from the non-federal sources. Now look, don't let this scare you, because this is not unique to CEP. It's the same for provisions 2 and 3, and also the same for standard operations when the federal reimbursement is less than the cost of providing meals. But it does mean that participating schools need to consider the financial impact of CEP. We have found that CEP was appealing to small and large LEAs, and the most important factor was the LEA-wide ISP. Schools often start to elect CEP when they have an ISP of around 55% or higher, meaning that almost 90% of meals are claimed at the free rate. We encourage you to use our estimator tool or FRAX to determine if CEP will work for you. And when assessing if CEP will financially benefit your school or district, don't forget to consider potential increases in state reimbursement. Our study found LEAs participating in CEP were more likely than non-participating LEAs to report an increase in non-federal funds. And the increase was primarily due to an increase in state funding. Next slide. If you're thinking about electing CEP for next school year, the ISP must be calculated using data as of April 1st of this year, the year preceding your CEP election. This determines your eligibility to participate in CEP. By April 15th, state agencies have to notify school districts of their district-wide eligibility status, and school districts also have to provide school-level eligibility data to their state agencies. Both eligibility lists have to be published on state websites by May 1st. USDA also puts links to all of the eligibility data nationwide on our website. Finally, June 30th is the election deadline, or the date by which districts electing CEP need to notify their state agency of their intent to participate. Next slide. We encourage states, school food authorities, and advocates to continue to work together to promote CEP in your state, provide technical assistance to schools considering CEP, and share best practices. We also recommend that schools focus on maximizing ISPs this spring so that LEAs can elect CEP or start a new 4-year cycle during school year 23-24. We're also very excited to share that we're working on a proposed rule to lower the minimum ISP for participation in CEP. This means that individual schools with lower ISPs would be eligible to participate in CEP. Our intention with this rule is to increase options for schools and to also support states that are implementing or considering universal free meals programs to be able to expand CEP participation. So please be sure to comment on the proposed rule when it comes out. But as this is only a proposed rule, currently the ISP threshold remains at 40%. Next slide, please. All right, so to access support materials, please visit the CEP Resource Center, which is a CEP-specific website on the USDA web page. And it features policy guidance, webinar recordings, and other tools to facilitate CEP implementation. In addition, the FNS School Programs Policy page includes all of our policy memos, Q&As, and other guidance materials, such as the CEP manual. This is a great place to go so you can find up-to-date policy on the National School Lunch and School Breakfast Program. I encourage you all to work closely with your state agency to discuss any opportunities for CEP elections. Thank you for your time. I'll turn it back over to Allison.
Thank you so much for all of this really awesome information, Latasha. Now I'm next to introduce our next speaker, who is Magdalena Prieto of Palm Beach County in Florida. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Next slide. As it says, as I've been introduced, I'm Maggie Prieto, General Manager of School Food Service for Palm Beach County. I wanted to tell you a little bit about our district. We have over 214,000 students enrolled, and we're the 10th largest school district in the US. Next slide. Our core values are passion, quality, and respect. All of our staff members have that on their sleeves, and they make sure that they bring that to the students every day, to their customers. Next slide. We have over 204 schools, and we also service 33 charter schools. We employ over 1,400 staff members. Last year, we're very proud to say we served 34.8 million meals, and that's an average of about 193,000 a day. And our direct cert is 46.97%. Next slide. So as we've been listening and hearing, CEP, free meals for all students. Next slide. So why did we want to go CEP? One of our district's equity statement reads in part, the school district of Palm Beach County acknowledges the existence of and will eliminate systems, processes, and mindsets that perpetuate race, ethnicity, poverty, disability, language status, undocumented status, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation. So again, as you can see, we have poverty highlighted there. We certainly wanted to try to do away with this as much as possible, and CEP was the answer for us. Next slide. And the question came, why now? Of course, as we all know, during the pandemic, we were able to feed all children for free. And so it ended up being a perfect segue for us to continue to do that this school year and into the future. We had been serving free breakfast for the last 10 years at no cost to anyone, regardless of their status. And then, of course, as we said, we saw our meal participation increase during the pandemic of about, even though our enrollment decreased. So this, again, was the perfect timing for us. We did have to overcome certain internal challenges, and I'll speak to those next. Next slide. And then one other item is, as I mentioned, our direct cert is 46.97, which ends up that our multiplier is 75.16%, which is better than just our traditional free and reduced DC plus our free and reduced applications. Next slide. So we were very happy to be able to put banners out on all of our schools, letting everyone know that there's no lunchbox required, and everyone is going to be able to eat both breakfast and lunch for free. Next slide. And so when I mentioned earlier about challenges and how we move forward with this and the communication that we had, next slide, I'm sorry. Here in Florida, there's 47 participating districts that either do partial CEP or all CEP schools. We actually met with quite a few of those districts to see how they were overcoming those challenges that they were encountering, as well as any concerns and what the stakeholders thought. And through that, we were able to really see that the direct cert information, as was mentioned by Latasha, is accurate, more accurate sometimes than free and reduced applications, and therefore can be validated. It's validated through state agencies. Next slide. We also had to meet with several of our departments that had concerns that we wouldn't have those free and reduced applications. We met with our E-rate department that they actually were excited because there was a possibility of additional funds going their way. Complexity pay, a lot of our principals, there's complexity pay that is related to free and reduced number of students in their school. We were able to work through that. And then the ESSA reporting, again, we were able to make sure that that was impacted. And the one that has always been a barrier or concern was Title I. And our Title I department was very, very flexible, and they were able to come up with a solution to make sure that Title I was not impacted. Next slide. Now we do have, as many school districts know, we do have other outside sources that rely on the free and reduced applications. And so the way that we are able to assist those is we have now an income survey that we use. And School Food Service does process that, but that assists with either test fees waivers. Sometimes there's some programs for eyeglasses or field trips, scholarships, those types of nature. So they're able to get, even if they're not DC certified, they can still put in that income survey. And we're able to give them an idea if we were accepting applications, where they would fall in the eligibility guidelines. And then since School Food Service is processing those, we in turn will be invoicing the district at the end of the year for each of those income surveys that we process. And it's going to be about a cost of 25 cents per income survey that was processed. Next slide. The one thing I do have to say is that you have to be very proactive. Again, we were very lucky that we were serving everyone, all the children, free for the last 2 years, close to 2 years. So it was nice, but we had to get our income survey up and running. We put out a bulletin to all the district schools to make sure they understood what this would mean. We still have to have a confidentiality process in place because of the direct cert information. And Title I, again, that was something that we wanted to stay ahead of. So on our website, we have a report that updates daily. So all principals could look at where they're at with Title I, and our Title I department had that information at their fingertips. Next slide. This is a little marketing campaign that we put out at the beginning, during the summer, right before school started. It was a postcard. And again, just making sure that everyone was aware that there's free lunch and breakfast for all students. And the good news is that our participation has absolutely increased. Breakfast has increased by 5% and lunch by 8%. And we've also had an increase in a la carte because, of course, instead of having to pay for those lunches, they're able to go ahead and get a little something extra with their meal. Next slide. And then grouping, I know Latasha touched base on this. I just wanted to say, with regards to Palm Beach County, we actually ended up creating 3 groups. And the way we analyzed that and how we decided who was going to be in which group was dependent not only on what their DC number was, but I also looked at participation. So I wanted to make sure that the schools that had the highest participation were in the group with the highest DC number. So that gave me more bang for the buck for the number of meals that were being served at that school. Next slide. And so that's CEP at Palm Beach County. If you have any questions or want more information, please feel free to email me and I'd be happy to assist. Thank you. And I'll turn it back to Allison.
Awesome. Incredible, Maggie. Thank you so much. Next, we have Heidi Seip of Umatilla School District out in Oregon. So I'll pass it over to her.
Thank you. So I'm very passionate about fueling learners, and CEP has allowed us to do so in a really unique and exciting way. Next slide. So prior to considering CEP, I think it's always important to think about demographics. So Umatilla is actually in rural Eastern Oregon. We do not get rain in our area. We're actually in the desert of Oregon. A lot of people think of Oregon and they think Portland, but we're in the desert. We are along the Columbia and Umatilla rivers, and we are a heavily agricultural area. We serve the second largest percentage of English language learners in the state of Oregon. And prior to CEP, 87% of our students K-12 qualified for free reduced price lunches. Next slide. What that meant for us was that few students were actually eligible for fully priced meals, which meant that we were doing a lot of paperwork to make sure that all of the students who were eligible qualified. And the district was subsidizing a significant portion of unpaid school lunch bills, mainly because many of the families who had unpaid school lunch bills were the same families who would later qualify once we walked them through that process. And so it put the district staff in a very uncomfortable situation where they were forced to either chase down quote unquote bad debt from families that we knew really couldn't afford it, and that they were really stuck in that situation of the reason that they had a lunch bill is because they should have been on free lunch that entire time. And so instead of asking those parents to then pay that debt, we were instead writing it off. And this created a pretty unsustainable financial situation. And so CEP has allowed us to really focus our energy, not on paperwork and not on debt collection or figuring out a way to solve the resource issue that comes with the lack of appropriate debt collection, but instead to focus on fueling our learners, which is what we're really passionate about. Next slide. So one of the things that has been really positive for us with CEP is we've been able to focus on nutrition. And that's really exciting. It's exciting for our kids and it's exciting for us. So off to the left there, what you can see is our mobile delivery van. We have a food truck that goes all summer long and serves students. That would not be possible if it weren't for this switch to CEP. And we did this a number of years ago, even pre-pandemic, we went district-wide CEP. And that van is an example of the ways in which our staff were able to be creative and work with some other programs because they had the energy and the bandwidth to take on some of those projects that previously they were so busy trying to figure out the application processes and those other pieces that they didn't really have the opportunity to be creative. And then off to the right, you can see a middle school tasting. We give a lot of input into students' hands and we give them the opportunity to decide what should be menued, what shouldn't, what makes sense, what doesn't. Next slide. And the other thing that's really become a benefit is we get to build connections with families around food and the positive ways in which we can bring families together around food instead of having adversarial conversations, trying to chase down paperwork or collect debts. You can see off to the left there, that was our holiday meal celebration. And so I got to go, and that's one of my assistant superintendents is what I always call my student advisors. So that's one of my assistant superintendents, Alan. And he and I got to share a meal in Thanksgiving. On average, we serve about 2,400 meals a day in our school system. We only have 1,400 students K-12, but we serve free breakfast, free lunch, and then free dinner and snack for students who stay in the after school program. So our participation rate is exceptionally high. It was high prior to CEP as well. So we really maintained that rate. What it allowed us to do was focus on these other areas to expand. Next slide. And one of those areas that has been so impactful for us is getting student involvement in cafeteria services. So one is menuing, and we do tastings at K-12. And as you can see there, that was the result of feedback at the middle school on blueberry hummus. And so at the elementary picture that you see above, they also tried blueberry hummus. And then every grade level got to decide if that was something they wanted to see added to their menu. And then you can see the picture above is a food waste audit. These are all amazing activities that have really gotten our students focused on the nutrition side of learning, which is wonderful. It's fabulous. We have a huge greenhouse that we just finished at the high school. We have a farm bot being built there. So there's a lot of wonderful programming that we can now focus on in addition to nutrition because of CEP. And it's not that we're bringing in money differently. It's not that we're bringing in more. I should say it is that we're bringing money in differently because we're bringing in about the same revenue as we did before. We just are able to spend our staff time on really focusing on programming, supporting students, our farm to school connections, our local produce vendors, and our own greenhouse instead of trying to track down paperwork. So it's just really been a wonderfully positive program for us. And I'm thrilled to see the continued support for CEP, thrilled to see possible expansion into other schools, and always willing and able to support others who are pursuing this option.
Awesome. Well, thank you to Latasha and Maggie and Heidi for all of that incredible insight that they shared with us about community eligibility. Now I want to take some time to discuss some of FRAC's resources that we have for community eligibility, starting with our community eligibility webpage. On this page, we have links to all of the resources that I'm about to discuss, and it's accessible at frac.org/community-eligibility. Next slide. We also have our community eligibility database where we house a list of all schools eligible for and currently participating in community eligibility in both a web-based platform and as a downloadable Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. And I saw somebody asked a question about this, but we on our FRAC website do collect every year and post a list of schools that are participating in community eligibility that we house in this database. So currently the list that is listed in the database contains participating schools for the 2021-2022 school year, which is last year. However, we are very close to being done with the participation list for the current school year, the 2022-2023 school year, and we'll update the list with data for this school year in the coming weeks once we finish obtaining data from all 50 states in the District of Columbia. Next slide. Another key community eligibility resource is our grouping tool. As Latasha sort of alluded to earlier, school districts can group multiple schools together to maximize ISPs and federal reimbursements across the district. And in order to facilitate this, we designed this tool that allows districts to upload a list of schools, which should include information about ISP and enrollment, to devise optimal groupings to achieve targeted ISPs and maximize reimbursement within the district. Next slide. We also have a series of financial calculators to help schools and districts calculate how to make community eligibility best work for their operations. We have 3 calculators: a break-even calculator, a district level calculator, and a more granular school level calculator. Next slide. The break-even calculator allows schools to use their ISP and basic information about school nutrition operations to calculate participation needed in breakfast, lunch, supper, and/or snack to break even with community eligibility. Next slide. The district level calculator allows districts to dig a little bit deeper to look at expenses and revenue under community eligibility by school type and compare implementing community eligibility to your current operations. Next. Both of these are available as web-based calculators and are also available as downloadable Excel spreadsheets. The more granular school level calculator is only available as in a downloadable Excel spreadsheet, which you can find at fraccep.org. Next slide. Next slide. I think we may have gone backwards. Next, there we go. So all of these resources and more from FRAC on community eligibility can be found on the links of these slides, including our CEP website, our most recent report on community eligibility from last school year, taking a fresh look at community eligibility, which is a one-pager that we update every year, making it work with lower ISPs, our database, our one-pager on the Medicaid Direct Certification Demonstration Project, our guides to improving direct certification, and the grouping tools and financial calculators. Next. So at this time, we are going to turn it over to our audience for questions. So we have at the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A icon, and you can sort of type in your question there and it'll come to us and I can read them out for the panelists to answer them. And so the first question that we have so far is, how does CEP impact Title I? How do they use this ISP percentages? And Latasha or Michelle, do you want to talk about CEP and Title I?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. As was mentioned earlier, Title I uses free and reduced price data. And so when schools are in CEP, they don't have that data. So Title I has a whole guide that we worked on with them, with the Department of Education, to provide alternatives for when a school doesn't have free and reduced price data, but instead they can use the CEP data. So we can just put that in a link, and the guidance will do a much better job than I will in explaining it, if that's all right, unless some of the other panelists wanted to hop in about their experience about Title I. We'll just share the guidance that Department of Education has put out.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. And it looks like Heidi, you answered this within the platform, but I thought that this would be helpful for everybody to hear. Somebody asked about, are there any challenges in having the infrastructure to feed more students? And if so, how do you address those resource needs?
Sure. So we, as I said earlier, we did not have a market increase in participation, but what we did have is that opportunity to shift and really rethink what we were doing. And so our salad bar immediately got a lot of attention. And then that really inspired a lot of our kitchen staff to want to take on more scratch cooking. And so we worked with various resources and programs to add more scratch cooking items, worked with our student leadership to find out which items they wanted for scratch cooking and how they wanted that handled. So they're currently working on trying to perfect some recipes for pozole right now and trying to make sure that all of that is rolling. And so those are the types of things that we've taken on because of that. We did not have the increases that other groups did. Instead, we had more of that freedom that we'd long wanted because our staff was able to get away from taking money and tracking paperwork and instead really focusing on serving students' nutritional needs.
Awesome. Thanks, Heidi. Somebody has asked if all of the links that are included in the presentation will be made available. Yes, after we close the webinar, recording with the PowerPoint presentation that has all of the links that are included in the presentation will be made available to all attendees. I think you sort of touched on this, Maggie, in the Q&A, but somebody asked about the differences in participation before CEP and after CEP. If you could touch a little bit on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So before CEP, our lunch participation was 58.79%, and our breakfast participation was 24.62%. So I see another question is, since we were offering free breakfast and lunch through the waivers during COVID, how come we are seeing these increases? You would think that it would stabilize. We did not market due to, of course, supply chain issues and staffing issues. Prior to this year, we really were not marketing the fact that we were offering free and free lunch and breakfast to everyone. Of course, everyone knew as much as we could do, we were. But this year we did embark on a nice marketing campaign. As I showed you, those postcards that were sent to each household, letting them know. We also have the banners at all the schools. So we are attributing our increase because of that marketing campaign that we've had.
Great, thank you. So it looks like somebody is asking about ISPs in the Q&A. So just to clarify, so the identified student percentage that is used to determine eligibility for schools to participate in CEP is only based off of direct certification. So that includes, as Latasha mentioned earlier, students whose families are already participating in another means tested program, such as SNAP or TANF or FDPR, and then also students who are categorically eligible because of other reasons. For example, they are classified as homeless or migrant students, or are Head Start, and therefore are automatically eligible for free meals. So those are the only ways to determine eligibility for community eligibility. I've also got a question about talking to how to get different stakeholders on board with CEP. And I think this is a great question for Heidi, actually. So Heidi, if you want to talk about getting different stakeholders involved and on board.
Sure. I think the first group that we really needed to engage with and be sure that they understood the full process was our school board. And they're incredibly supportive of CEP. Initially, the data that we shared with them was that unpaid debt data. And we talked about the percentage of families who had unpaid debts who later qualified for free or reduced lunch, given the paperwork piece. And we talked about the impact on those families and the impact on staff for having to even engage in those conversations and the way in which that was changing the relationship between the school and the family and our concerns with that. That allowed us to start in on the exploration phase of this. As soon as we were able to look and recognize this is the amount that the district will need to pay for the difference for our estimate, it was actually quite small, and the board was incredibly supportive of moving forward. Then it came down to talking to some of our stakeholder groups with parents and students. I have a superintendent advisory council that's entirely made up of students. And so we made sure that they understood what we were going toward. They were incredibly supportive. And then we move forward. Once that happened, we've seen a bit of a shift. And I think that initial support from the board was very important because the shift that we've seen has actually been post-COVID. And that is that our eligibility numbers, especially because of SNAP participation, have gone down because fewer families in our community are applying for SNAP benefits because their children are already receiving breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snack at school each day. And they don't necessarily see the need to go out and apply for benefits for which they may be eligible. And so our district has had to pay a greater amount because our number has been driven down. So we've had to pay a greater difference amount. The board did not question that this year. They instantly understood that the need was still there. They understood that instead this was a marketing and educational opportunity. And so at spring conferences, what we'll be talking to families about is making sure that they understand that there may be services for which they are still eligible and that it's really important for them to consider applying for that so that we can maintain CEP long-term in our community. And perhaps there has been a large economic shift of which we are unaware, in which case we need to really engage with our families and have that conversation, because then we may need to look at this differently. But right now, we know that our number is still in the high 80s of families that would qualify for free reduced lunch. So we want to make certain that we're serving those families well, and getting the board on board first was really important.
Great, thanks for that, Heidi. So again, just as a reminder, community eligibility is only takes into account students who are directly certified for free meals. And if you're seeing eligibility, if you're seeing issues with direct certification in your district, there are certainly strategies that exist to sort of boost up that direct certification, those direct certification numbers, including running direct certification multiple times throughout the school year, to make sure that students that are coming into different programs and are being directly certified throughout the year are included in that ISP. There's also a number of strategies that we include in our direct certification strategies. Briefs that are linked in this slideshow that will go out to everybody that we can include. And then also just want to flag, if your state is not currently participating in the Medicaid direct certification demonstration project, that is also a great way for states to sort of encourage people to or boost direct certification, because it sort of opens up the pool of students that are directly certified. So if if your state is not currently participating in that demonstration project, go ahead and reach out to your state agency to apply. I know that the request for proposals for the next school year is not out yet, but I know that it should be coming out soon. I'm not sure when that is, but I defer to my colleagues at FNS to they can keep us posted as to when that comes out, so that more states can apply and get involved in that. Please feel free to enter your questions. or to enter your questions through the Q&A. And I actually have a question for Maggie and Heidi. This is sort of a summary question. If you could give a quick elevator pitch as to why schools should consider community eligibility and just why districts should consider community eligibility, what would that be?
I would have to say just the sheer fact that you're able to offer, I'm going to speak more towards lunch, of course, because we were able to offer breakfast for free. But the fact that you're able to give that opportunity to a child, whether they're in need or not, is just amazing. And we've seen it every day in every school that I get to go into, that the fact that they can go in and know they can have either a hot or cold meal and not have to worry about it. So that's my elevator pitch.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I really think food plays an important part in building community and in creating a sense of belonging and a sense of connection. And when we can make that a positive experience for students, when we can open the doors and welcome parents, when we can really focus on creating school nutrition as a way to fuel learners, and we can change the dialogue for how important it is to fuel learners instead of how important it is to do the paperwork and chase the money. That is such an important switch, and it's really empowering to staff. And I think the one thing that hasn't been touched on yet is also the staff retention improvements that we've seen when staff were able to start playing with recipes and having fun cooking and getting kids involved and getting that feedback, hearing feedback from families. That's empowering and that's fun. And school nutrition should be fun. It should build positive memories for kids. Food should be a positive experience for families. And this is a way to build community. And I just absolutely value it for that. The first word is community. Let's celebrate that.
Couldn't agree more. Well, with that, we can go ahead and wrap up the webinar for today. So thank you all for joining us for today's webinar, and a special thank you to Latasha, Michelle, Maggie, and Heidi for joining us and sharing your expertise. I also want to take a moment to thank the co-sponsors of this webinar, the American Federation of Teachers, the School Superintendents Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Association of School Business Officials, the Education Trust, the National Education Association, the School Nutrition Association, Share Our Strength, Unidos US, and the Urban School Food Alliance for co-sponsoring this webinar. We appreciate your support and help. As mentioned before, the recording and resources that we talked about today will be shared in a follow-up email. And in the meantime, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us if you have any questions. My email is aperez@frac.org. If you have any questions for me or for any of the presenters, I'm happy to connect people to you. And with that, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk soon.